Hello, close your eyes for a moment if you like. Imagine yourself standing by a river. Quiet, no city lights, no traffic noise, just the wind and the sound of flowing water. The river is called the Tiber. Here, in a time that no one remembers clearly, began a legend, not with swords and shields, but with fate, destiny, and a wolf. Before Rome, before the stone walls, the arenas, before there were kings or republics, there were only legends, stories told in the dark, by firelight. And none of them are as often told as the story of Romulus and Remus. Two names, two twins, and a wolf. The story begins with a man named Numitor, king of Alba Longa, a small city-state in the region of Latium, south of what would become Rome. Numitor was overthrown by his brother Amulius. But Amulius didn't just want the throne. He wanted to make sure that no one in Numitor's bloodline could claim it. He killed all of Numitor's sons, and his daughter, Rhea Silvia, was forced to become a priestess in the Temple of Vesta, meaning she was not allowed to marry or have children. Amulius believed that this would be safe. But then, like many ancient myths, fate would not let him be. It is said that Mars, the god of war, visited Rhea Silvia one rainy night. No one knows for sure, but then she became pregnant and gave birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus. Amulius was furious. He ordered the three of them killed. Rhea Silvia was thrown into prison, and the two children, by order of the king, were to be drowned in the Tiber. But when the guards reached the riverbank, they saw that the water was rising, and their hearts sank. They couldn't bear it, so they put the two children in a basket and let it float down the river. The basket drifted to the shore, stuck in the marshes, what would later be called Palatine Hill, the center of the future city of Rome. And there, something strange happened. A she-wolf, according to legend, found the two children. Instead of eating them, she fed them, watched over them, and became the first mother of Rome. The image of the she-wolf and the two children suckling became a symbol that lived forever in the hearts of the Romans. To this day, it is still present on statues, coats of arms, and even ancient coins. Then a shepherd named Faustulus found them. He brought them home with his wife Acca Laurentia and raised them as his own children. The two boys grew up in the wild, among the fields and forests. They were strong, brave, and had no idea who they were. They only knew that they were different. They often played fighting games, argued, and sometimes led the whole group of children in the village to do mischief. When they grew up, while helping the villagers fight off robbers, Romulus and Remus were captured and taken to Alba Longa. There, they met their grandfather Numitor without knowing who he was. But then, the stories, the memories, and the small details gradually made Numitor realize this was his grandson. Romulus and Remus learned the truth about their origins, about their mother, and about the usurper Amulius. Together they overthrew him, handing the throne to their grandfather. After their victory, it was expected that either Romulus or Remus would succeed their grandfather. But they chose a different path. The two brothers left Alba Longa, returning to the land by the Tiber River, where the basket had drifted. They decided to build a new city where they would be the leaders. But then, fate intervened once again. The story from here has many versions, but all end in tragedy. Romulus and Remus argued about where to build the city, about the name of the city, about who would rule. Romulus began to build a wall, the first wall of Rome. Remus, as if to mock him, jumped over it and teased his brother. Romulus was furious. In a moment, he killed Remus. Some versions say it was accidental. Others say Romulus did it out of pure anger. Either way, Remus died. Romulus became the sole founder of the city. The date is recorded as April 21st, 753 BC, the day Rome was founded. Romulus established the first system of government, dividing the population into tribes and laying the foundations for the Senate and the army. He also came up with a way to invite refugees, slaves, and outcasts from all over to Rome, turning the city into a haven for the forgotten. And in another famous anecdote, he held a festival called the Sabine tribes to come and kidnapped Sabine women to be wives for the Romans. The story, both strange and repulsive by today's standards, is part of the myth of the founding of Rome. Romulus ruled for many years. It is said that he did not die like a normal person, but was carried to heaven by the god Mars. The Romans later worshipped him as a god, taking the name Quirinus. And from there, Rome, from a story, a legend, began to enter real history. You see, sometimes a city doesn't start with a war, but with a story told and retold for over 2,000 years. The story of two brothers, a wolf, a basket floating down a river, and a dream called Rome. Imagine a misty early morning on the low hills on either side of the Tiber River. The mist has not yet cleared. The sound of water lapping gently against the side of a boat. A small raft drifts, on it a few fishermen holding nets, their eyes following the mirror-like water. No one knows that this very ordinary place will become the center of an empire. Before there was a city, before there were paved streets or sewers, Rome was just a small group of huts. Thatched huts, straw roofs, scattered over 7 hills: Palatine, Aventine, Celian, Esquiline, Viminal, Quirinal, and Capitoline. No king, no general, no writing, only the sound of insects at night, the distant barking of dogs, and a small community living off the land, the water, and each other. The early Romans were mainly farmers, fishermen, and hunters. They did not build walls, nor did they have any concept of borders. They were surrounded by forests, plains, and other tribes. The world was as vast and vague as the mists of the early morning Tiber. To the north, there were the Etruscans, a more advanced civilization. The Etruscans built houses of stone, practiced ritual burials, and had their own writing system. They did not just live, they organized. And the Romans learned a lot from them. Road building, aqueducts, temple architecture, social stratification, and the concept of a state. Whether the relationship between early Rome and the Etruscan city-states was friendly or hostile is not clear, but it was certainly influential. Meanwhile, to the south of the Italian peninsula, Greek colonies were springing up like mushrooms. Naples, Neapolis, Cumae, Tarentum. The Greeks brought writing, epics, statues, and philosophy. The Romans not only saw, they remembered. Their mythology gradually became like that of the Greeks. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune. A multicultural world emerged, and in the middle, like a massive land rising from the Tiber, was Rome. Somewhere around the 7th century BC, something began to change. The individual villages on the hills began to connect with each other. They built dirt roads, then gradually paved them with stone. They began to hold fairs, festivals, and common sacrifices. And most of all, they began to realize the power of unity. In the center of Rome at that time, there was a low-lying area, originally a swamp, that the ancient Romans drained, filled in, and turned into the Forum Romanum. It was there that would later become the heart of the city. It was there that the parliament met, merchants traded, and citizens heard the news. Rome gradually became a city, not because of the walls, but because of the community. Not because of the palace, but because of the sense of togetherness. At this time, Roman society was divided into 2 main classes: patricians, nobles, families with long lineages, who held most of the land and power; plebeians, commoners, laborers, farmers, merchants. The patricians sat in the council, wearing white togas with purple trim. The plebeians traded in the market wearing simple cloth. They were different, but they needed each other. Without the people, the nobles had no one to rule. Without laws, the people had no one to protect them. Ancient Rome had no Bible. They had legends. They believed in gods who ruled over every area, from agriculture to doors. Every house had a small altar. Every month had its own days of worship. Religion was not a distant thing. It was part of the rhythm of everyday life. You sowed seeds, you prayed to Ceres. You walked a road, you prayed to Mercury. You started building a house, you prayed to Janus, the god of beginnings. And people lived with the feeling that everything had meaning, big and small. There were no banks in Rome. They bartered: meat for cloth, wine for salt, coins as denarius came later. People bought and sold in the market, traded at the forum, traded with the Etruscans, with the Greeks, and even the Gauls to the north. Rome was not rich, but it was expanding. They learned, improved, and shared with each other. From a very early age, Rome understood that to survive, they had to defend themselves. Every adult male citizen was obliged to bear arms, first as peasants, then as organized mercenaries. Small skirmishes with neighboring tribes helped Rome hone its fighting skills. And slowly, they learned not only to defend themselves, but also to conquer. Just look back from the huts on the banks of the Tiber. Rome learned and adapted. They didn't invent everything, but they combined and perfected it. From the Etruscans, they learned organization. From the Greeks, they learned philosophy and art. From themselves, they learned patience and commitment. Rome was then just a small dot on the map, but that dot was growing every day. And one day, it would become the center of the world. When the first light of the 6th century BC shone upon the dirt streets of ancient Rome, no one knew that a historic shift was taking place. At that time, Rome was still a city-state with a functioning monarchy, and the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, reigned supreme. But power, unchecked, leads to ruin, and that is exactly what happened. Tarquinius Superbus, also known as Tarquin the Arrogant, was the 7th king of ancient Rome. He was not elected by the people, but ascended to the throne by usurping the throne of his predecessor, Servius Tullius. Legend has it that Tarquin had his wife, Servius's daughter, plot to kill him, then seize the throne for himself. From the start, Tarquin's reign was marked by violence and betrayal. He ruled with an iron fist, dismissing senators who did not support him, not consulting the council before major decisions, and establishing a near-despotic rule. But perhaps what most outraged the people was not the heavy taxes or the repressive whips, but the insult to honor a sacred thing for the Romans. One fateful night, Tarquin's son, Sextus Tarquinius, raped a noblewoman named Lucretia. Lucretia, considered a paragon of virtue, told her husband and father about the whole thing, then committed suicide to preserve her honor. This event was like a thunderbolt to the hearts of the Roman people. Lucius Junius Brutus, a nobleman and also a close friend of Lucretia, stood up to call for an uprising in the name of justice and the indignation of the people. He raised his sword and swore that Rome would never again be ruled by a king. And so, in 509 BC, Rome officially ended the monarchy. Tarquin was banished from the city, never to return. In its place, a new form of government was born, the Roman Republic, residential publica Romana. With no king, power was shared. Instead of a single ruler, Rome elected 2 consuls each year, who would take turns running the state and the army. Power was balanced, and people began to believe in something beyond bloodline, the rule of law and the will of the community. The word republic, residential publica, means public business. It embodied a principle that the Romans held dear. The state did not belong to any one person, but was the common property of all its citizens. However, in reality, this system was not a complete democracy. The social classes in Roman society were still very clear. Patricians, the aristocracy, held the majority of political power. Plebeians, the common people, numerous but with little power. And those who were not citizens, slaves, women, foreigners were still excluded from the decision-making process. However, the Roman Republic was still a great step forward compared to the previous monarchy. If under the monarchy, the will of the king was law, under the Republic, debate became the center of political life. The Roman Forum, Forum Romanum, became the place where senators, officials, and even commoners gathered to speak, debate, and persuade. From here, the art of rhetoric developed. Figures like Cato and Cicero later emerged not only with the sword, but with words. Rome began to learn to rule by reason, not just by the sword. Lucius Junius Brutus, the initiator of the revolution, became one of the first 2 consuls. But tragedy did not spare him. Brutus' 2 sons were discovered plotting to bring Tarquin back to Rome. Brutus, not letting family ties cloud his judgment, ordered his own son's execution to demonstrate that the law was above all else. including family. It was a moment both tragic and defining of the spirit of the Roman Republic. Justice had no privileges. Tarquinius Superbus was not content with defeat. After his exile, he appealed to neighboring kingdoms, especially the Etruscans, and led his army on several occasions to attack Rome in an attempt to regain the throne. In the following years, battles raged. At the Battle of Lake Regillus, Rome almost fell. But then, with the resilience of its people and the skill of its generals, Rome held on to the Republic. In the end, Tarquin died in exile. No king, no throne. Rome had conquered its own past. With the end of the monarchy, Rome took the first step on the path that would lead to a great empire. But from here, they entered a long period of centuries of instability, civil war, reform, and conquest. The conflicts between patricians and plebeians, between personal interests and the common good, would gradually emerge like undercurrents in the heart of the Republic. But Rome was changed forever. They were no longer a small kingdom on the banks of the Tiber, but a society that could resist, that could organize, that believed in something bigger than a king. In the quiet moonlight of an ancient Roman night, perhaps a potter sat by his fire, telling his children the story of the proud king and the virtuous woman Lucretia. In that story, there were no gods or miracles, just people with their emotional decisions, mistakes, and eventual awakenings. And it was from these stories that Rome was reborn. No longer a city that bowed to power, but a community that dared to stand up, to say no, and to rewrite its own history.